Hey guys, it's Professor Fernandez giving you a brief or somewhat brief lesson on the elements of design. And this is specifically for the graphic novel Monstress that we've been reading here for the last 2 weeks. So last week we got a chance to talk about the narrative. We talked about goal, motivation, conflict, and we talked about the elements of fiction. And now we are talking about the elements of design. The subtitle of this wonderful presentation is How I Plan on Ruining Every Visual for the Rest of Your Life. Um, I actually had a student say that I have ruined comic books for them, and then I said thank you. Um, they did not say you're welcome though. Um, or actually, I said you're welcome, and they did not say thank you. And so, yeah, let's get going. So, welcome to this lesson. This lesson, my goal is to help you have you learn three things for sure. That by the end of this time of this video, you'll learn these three things. You'll learn how to identify the elements of design, how to analyze these elements of design to establish what the argument is in, say, a comic book panel, and how the elements of design are used in the graphic novel, specifically Monstress. One of the things that I usually do, as you well know, is that I usually have a voiceover with my PowerPoint presentations. But because this is design and I really want to use the pointer on my computer here, as you can see, to point out some things, I thought I would rather just do a whole video instead of just doing a voiceover on the PowerPoint. So you'll have both of these items for yourself. You'll have the video and you'll have the PowerPoint as well. So for this particular lesson, you're going to need a copy of Monstress because you're going to look at it. You'll never look at it the same, so look at it now because when we're done, you're going to look at it way differently. Of course, paper and pen for notes. You always take notes in my class, whether I'm doing a video or a PowerPoint with a voiceover or in class. So it doesn't matter if you're in my face-to-face class, hybrid, or online class. Always take notes. And you always take notes because things that you learn stick in your brain a lot better when you are writing things down. And you're also going to need the elements of a design chart that's part of this lesson. It's in D2L. You actually have two. You have a chart and then you have like a PDF where the first page is those 7 elements. You don't need the second page, you just need the first. So either one of them will be fine. So you can follow along as I'm doing this. So I want to review what's in your toolbox here. And you've heard me say this many times during the semester. I'm adding tools in your toolbox because there's many things that you can look at for argument and many tools that you would need depending on what you're looking at. We looked at the elements of argument first. It was one of the first things that you learned in class. Then we looked at elements of fiction when we looked at Harris and Bergeron. And then we looked at poetry, elements of poetry. And so I'm going to add a tool. In addition to those tools, you also have this tool. And it's not really a tool. I call it a tool because it's in your toolbox, but this is actually the process, how you will look at things. And it's steps 1 through 5. And if you haven't realized that we are going in steps 1 through 5, when we're talking about things either in the class or in a PowerPoint lesson, or even when I'm asking you to do activities in a discussion board and I say, all right, we're going to take the context part, or we're going to take the writer's purpose part, and we're just going to concentrate on this. I'm actually going leading you through the 5-step process, or I'm actually um, having you do one of the steps as a grade or as an activity in class. So here are the 5 steps process, and of course this should look familiar because this was in your rhetorical situation lesson from a couple weeks ago. You have this asterisk here. And it's wonderful. I have a pointer, I can point it out. This asterisk right here that says, what's the strategy? And remember, the asterisk is there because when you get to step 5, that's when you're going to pull out one of the other elements, right? Say you're going through the rhetorical situation of Monstress and you're looking at just the narrative and you get to step 5. So what are you going to pull out? Well, if it's a narrative, you're definitely going to pull out the elements of fiction because it's a story, right? And you're going to pull out goal, motivation, conflict because we just learned that as well. So you're gonna pull those out and talk about strategy. So I just wanted you to remember what this rhetorical situation is, and that even though it's called situation, it really is a process. So here's the new tool that I'm adding. It's called the Elements of Design. And this is what you pull out whenever you're looking at something visual, whether it is a picture or whether it is panels in a graphic novel like in Monstress, whether you're looking at a commercial, print commercial, TV commercial, Super Bowl commercials. If you're looking at if you're looking at anything, TV, movies, if you're looking at anything visual, this is what you pull out when we're talking about strategy. You're talking about line, color, shape, value, size, texture, and space. You have seven here. Seven value or seven elements of design. If you ever do a Google search on the elements of design, you'll know that you'll see that there's one more element, and they call it form. And you'll see form. Form is part of this. I think, put it as part of shape. So it's seven elements here, um, but it's eight elements somewhere else. Okay, so a couple of things that you want to know about, just like the elements of argument, what you are about to experience is old words but with new meanings and concepts attached to them. So that means you're building a new vocabulary again. Um, one of the things that students have issues with elements of argument is trying to understand what persuasion means, trying to understand um, what what those words mean, thinking that you already know, but we're using those words in a different way. And so then students get confused and say, well, what does persuasion mean? I thought it meant this. I thought assumptions meant this. It does in the regular day-to-day outside of 1302 work, but it means something completely different when you're looking at argument. And it's the same with the elements of design. You're looking, you know what a line is. If you look at a line, you'll know, okay, that's a line. But lines mean line in this way in this element, but they also mean something else. Um, this is one of those lessons you're going to want to repeat a couple of times. You're not going to get it at the first watch. I'm guaranteeing you're not going to get it first watch. I think by far this is one of the toughest lessons I have to teach in 1302, simply because it's something that you think you get and then when you put it in practice you don't really get. So you want to see this a couple times, and, and you want to practice this a lot. I've practiced it a lot and I have a master's degree. So you're going to want to practice this a lot, and I'm going to go through a couple of panels and a couple of images with you at the end, and go through an annotation with you a couple of times so you understand how that works. Um, it's Think of this as the artist writing both with shapes, colors, and hues. They're writing their argument, um, but they're not using words. They're literally using visuals. So that means you've got to switch off the, oh, this looks really great, or oh, that's an interesting image, to, okay, what are you really trying to tell me here with your choices? So always remember all the choices are deliberate. And also remember that this is about where your eyes go. Um, Eyes usually go top, left, right, because it reads, goes to the center. uh, be cognizant of where your eyes go when you're looking at the art in Monstrous. Specifically, if you're looking at specific panels or specific images, where does your eye go? And wherever it goes naturally, don't think it's doing that because your eye is naturally going there. No, it's going there because the artist specifically wants you to look at something. So again, like I said, this goes for anything that you see, TV shows, movies, commercials. Enjoy. Okay, let's go through them. So the first one is pretty simple. It's line. It's literally the mark between 2 points. Yes, the straightest path to points is a straight line. very true. But a line could mean anything that swirls, anything that's squiggly, anything that's curved. It's also the direction that the eye goes, so it's an implied line as well. So it doesn't even have to be drawn. It could just be that your eye goes from one point of the panel or one point of the image to the other one naturally. You're following an implied line. That's why I say you have to um, consider the lines, or consider what your eye is doing. Okay, so the next one is shape. And this one also has form in it. Remember I said there was, if you looked up elements of design, some people have 7, some people have 8. And I've actually put form inside of shape, and I'll tell you why in a minute. So shapes can mean squares, triangles, circles, rectangles, all those things that you learn in geometry class. They're coming back to haunt you. Yes, they are coming back to haunt you. You did have to go to geometry and you did have to learn something. So all those things are shapes, and shapes come in the geometric forms, of course, like squares and triangles and circles and rectangles. Of course, there's the natural shapes like um, trees and leaves and whatnot, so anything that you can find in nature. And then there's the abstract shapes that you don't find in nature. They're not geographic, they're kind of like out there, like splat. A splat is an abstract. Sometimes, well, actually you really can't find a splat in nature. It's usually, unless rain falls, but it doesn't fall like that. It's a weird thing. Anyway, so anything that's abstract, like these little things here, are abstract. They're not bubbles. It's not a geometric shape. It's an abstract shape. It's not quite a square. It looks torn. So you want to look at things like this because it emphasizes an attention to something. In this particular visual, there's a lots of things to look at, but one of the things that you're probably looking at is these words, thinking, what am I doing and why did I sign up for this class and why are we reading this? But you're looking at this and you're reading this, and this is different from like the thought bubbles or the word bubbles over or around a character's mouth. And the reason is because this is different. So it's emphasizing attention to something. It's emphasizing that this part of the narrative is different. And really, um, um, this is like somebody recalling um, a story, and it's Miss Halfwolf kind of talking as if she's looking back. So that's why those shapes are there. And the reason why form is in this element is because form literally means squares, triangles, circles, rectangles in 3D. So we're talking about cubes, and we're talking about spheres, and we're talking about boxes, right? Kind of gives it a little bit of depth. So we have here like a half sphere here. So this is some form going on right here. And we have some other things. I think this may be one of the images that you're going to be asked to evaluate in one of your activities. So I don't want to give too much away. So let's talk about color. Color is super important because it defines important. It's also how things are made to look pretty. So, really, when we're talking about color, we're talking about hue. We're talking about the name of a color, red, yellow, purple. And then hues have values. They're dark or they're light. So, it's dark red or light blue. And so when we're looking at those colors, they have a feel to them. So the darker the color, the the darker the emotion. So sad, desolate, depressed, um, very red could be angry or fire or burning or passion even. Light colors, your pinks and your light blues can be happy or hopeful, or even luxurious, like in the picture here. So you have your warm versus cool colors. You can actually Google color wheels and you can see which colors are considered cool and which colors are considered warm. You would think purple is a warm color, but it's actually a cool color. Um, That I'd like to argue with somebody who can change that, but alas, I have not found that person. So if you want to Google color wheel, you can find out what colors are cool or warm as maybe part of your research as you're looking at the art here in Monstress. The absence of color can be used as well. If you've seen pictures where it's black and white and then there's one pop of color, like maybe like um, black and white photo with the red umbrella. I know you've seen that probably at Walmart. You know, a really cool painting happened, or a really good picture, really cool picture was mass reproduced and put into Walmart a couple of years ago. The absence of color makes the red pop, which means the red is very important in an image like that, and it elevates it. And so the argument there is that you can always have shelter in a storm. So it's really interesting. Or if there's a couple and they're under the umbrella and they're kissing, you know, that one's also another mass reproduced image. And it's raining, but they're under the umbrella and like there's a little bit of a kiss. The argument there with the red popping of the umbrella. The argument there is that love or passion can get you through a storm. So it's really interesting. People thought, oh well, that's just cute. They're just playing with color, and it's just really cool how the red umbrella is being popped out of the black and white photo. No, they're actually making an argument. And yes, you're welcome for me ruining that wonderful image for you. Um, you also want to watch out for times that color contrasts to what's happening in the scene, because that's a juxtaposition. That's definitely something that's being said. In particular, I guess this is also one of the images that I've asked you to consider in one of your activities. So I will give you a hint a little bit in this one. The colors are really, really bright. It's a bright room. There's lots of things and monsters that are dark. There's very few lights happening. It's light. It's not a little bit tinge on the darkish, but it's light. You've got these reds, and it's like a dark red next to a gold. You've got this gold and this green, lots of gold, lots of warm colors there. It makes it look luxurious. And even though there's this luxurious scene, you can tell these people have like money and whatnot, are very well to do. Someone, and unfortunately, um, Screenomatic has cut this off, but someone, they're talking to someone who is in cage. So there's this juxtaposition between wealth and luxury versus um, oppression. So what does that say? Oppression versus luxury. So I will leave that for you to ponder because I'm not doing work for you. Okay, so size is exactly what it is. How big or small something is, and how big or small something is in relation to each other, to other things in the visual. It stresses importance. I feel like every one of these stresses importance, but and we'll talk about it when I get to annotating some of the images at the end of this presentation. They don't use the artist typically doesn't use um, all of them together in emphasis. They may have all 7 elements of design in there, but they're using maybe just size, or maybe just color, or maybe just lines to emphasize something. So, um, so when I say they could use it to emphasize or say something's important, um, they're using just that one to say something is important. They're not using also color. They're using just size. Um, they may do some awesome shading as they have in this picture, but they'll just use size. So this can also mean that the panel feels big. I think one of the panels that I've asked you to consider actually has a big feel. And why does it have a big feel? Um, what is the author trying to emphasize with the big feel here? So looking at this particular picture, we have a three-eyed monster smack dab in the middle of a frame, and you have it's huge, bigger than life, takes up almost the entire panel, and you've got the protagonist and their friend here, very small, very tiny, and the wording is so tiny that you've got to almost kind of squint to see it. And so this is emphasizing, this picture is emphasizing how big this monster is. You can use this particular monster because this is not the monster that's inside Miss Half-Wolf. At least I don't believe it is. This is an outside monster, and they're not afraid of it. So, how important is this monster? Is this monster a symbol of something? Is it a metaphor for something? Um, what could it be? I'm not going to tell you. I'm not doing your work for you. Moving on. Space is a really good one because it's kind of, people really don't consider it often unless it's almost right in their face. So it's really the space around, between, and inside objects in a visual. So if things are really close to each other, it can mean there's an intimacy there, or just some discomfort there. Space can also denote isolation. And this is a really good one. And again, the screen has cut this off, but if you go to Monstress and you see this one, um, this is a really good example. I actually am going to talk about this particular visual at the end of the presentation. And value. Value, we've talked about before when we talked about color, is literally the darkness or the lightness of the tones and the hues. So how dark, if it's black versus midnight, black is lighter than midnight. um, or blue black. It's so dark it's blue almost. So you want to understand, like, if there's shades of the same color, or if they're in the same color wheel, kind of the lightness and the darkness of it. White is the lightest value, black is the darkest value. So there is nothing blacker than black. There's nothing whiter than white. And there's the one in the middle is called middle gray. And that's in, if you're looking at them in a, like in a spectrum or in an integer line, like you do in algebra. Yes, algebra is also coming back to haunt you. And you have things between, you know, zero being in the middle, and then you have infinite number of positive integers on the right and infinite numbers of negative integers on the left. Then white would be on the left, black would be on the right, and gray would be zero. So you want to think about the intensity and what those intensity of hues mean. And this one in particular is going to be really fun to talk to. This is one of the ones I'm talking about at the end of the presentation. Texture. Texture is fun, and it's really hard as an artist to get texture. Um, I don't consider myself a visual artist, but I've taken a photograph or two in my life for as a paying gig, and let me tell you, it's not as easy as you think. One of the quickest ways to get texture is to zoom in on something. Um, so if something is usually a little close up, they're usually playing with texture, and they're emphasizing the scene. Just like here, Miss Half-Wolf, here, there's texture. There's wet here, the wet from her tears and a little bit from her snot coming down here, so you can see the wet. You can see the textures in her hair. Every strand, every stringy strand is there. You can see kind of how her face is just twisted up in pain. So this is texture here that the artist is playing with. And usually there's texture. You can have texture where you don't have such a close shot here of an object or a character. You can actually have texture just in like a bigger, like, far away scene. Um, and I wish an artist would talk about how that happens. I cannot tell you how that happens, but I can tell you when I see it. Um, I don't know how an artist does texture when something's is perceived as far away in an image, but it can be done, and I have seen it. So, if you want more info of the elements of design, you can check out this video, because this is a video. This lesson's a video instead of a PowerPoint. You can't click on this, and I'm not gonna click on this for you. But this is in D2L, and you can. There's a link there. I think it's gonna be embedded into D2L, and you can just click on it and listen to it. It just kind of reinforces what I've talked about, if you just need another way of trying to understand these elements. Again, this is this is not one of those lessons that you can see one time and be okay. You want to see this a couple times to have a full understanding. Okay, so now we're going to look at some art here and we're going to annotate things. What's kind of unfortunate sometimes, depending on the semester, if it's a hybrid semester or if it's a online class, I don't get to show you how to do really cool annotations. If you are a face-to-face class, I have probably taught you ad nauseum how to do annotations. So I'm going to teach you how to annotate visuals here. I usually like to use post-it notes on things because I can just grab a post-it note, write down an idea, put it over the image, and keep going with the same image. And one particular image will have many, many post-it notes because I have many, many things to say. So annotation really means taking notes as part of a thought process. Not so much taking notes because I have to regurgitate the information later. It's taking notes because eventually I'm going to look at all these notes. I'm going to ask questions of what's in front of me, and I'm going to try to answer them because I have to think of an argument here. So it's really like you're asking questions of the thing in front of you as you're taking it in, as you're analyzing it. So no, you're not taking notes because there's going to be a quiz on it. You're taking notes to understand. And that's a different way of thinking, right? Um, in particular with Monstress and in particular with these slides, context is everything. Remember that these slides are part of a bigger story. There's a bigger narrative arc here. And we talked about narrative arc when we talked about narrative, right? There's a bigger narrative arc. So the arguments that you see in these panels are part of the bigger argument of the narrative arc of the graphic novel. Okay, so don't just say, oh, well, this panel has this argument and this panel has this argument and they're different arguments. No, they're really not. They're maybe making different arguments, but it's the same shade of the argument, of the bigger argument. Or they may not even have an argument. They are just reinforcing a bigger argument that's in the narrative arc. Okay? Another thing, and I'll say it again, practice, practice, practice. Practice makes perfect. It's a cliche because it is true. You're not going to get this again for in the first time you see this. You're not going to get this. It takes a while. It takes a lots of practice. So let's start. So this is the first image that you see with Monstress, and it's a very powerful image. Usually when students see this, they're like, oh my God, there's a naked girl here. Oh my God. And that's before they even read it and find out that she's not even human, um, or or whatnot. They make assumptions. Oh, she's being purchased, or this is part of a sex thing, and they don't read through. Um, or they just read through and just make assumptions without looking at the art. So let's look at this. And this is why I have my beautiful pointer here. So whenever I look at an image, I like to see the shape of the image. I don't know, it's a thing with me, and this comes from many, many years in journalism. The shape of this image is a rectangle. This has nothing to do with like shape as being one of the 7 elements of design. I just like to know what the shape is because I like to know what's in the center. Because what's in the center is usually a focal point, and a focal point means your eye usually goes there. The focal point here is this mark here. It's an eye. Hello. It's an eye. It's looking back at you, and you're looking at it, and it's looking back at you. And so, what do you feel as someone who is reading this? It's a naked woman with an eye. Do you feel shame? Because that may be a feeling that's happening here. This is one of those shapes. It's a kind of it's an oval, so it's a geometric shape. So we're playing with shapes here. So this is one of the elements here. We're playing with shapes, and we're playing a little bit with line here. Remember, a line doesn't necessarily mean a straight line. It could be a curved line. So we've got curved line here, and this is an implied curve here, an implied curve here, this curve here, curve there. We're playing with, and we're also playing with shapes right in the middle of a frame. So right here, we already know that she is marked. This particular character, we don't know who they are. We know that they are marked. We know that there is a collar around their neck, and change. There's some texture going on here. Remember I said sometimes it's so much easier to see texture when it's close up. Um, and like artists can do texture when it's not close up. There's texture right here. You can see the chains. Um, and you can almost feel them. They almost you can see it's kind of rusty. So there's some hues here, playing here, some hues and some value with the shading here. You have some texture here. Let's look at the face of Miss Half Wolf here. Her name is Micah, but I like calling her Half Wolf. Miss Micah here is a look of don't touch me because I'm about to rip you a half. Or it could be the look of utter disgust. You can argue that as well. So we have a woman who is naked, chained up. You have this whip here, this nice little curve. This is line. Remember, a line doesn't have to be a straight line. So we have this nice curve here, kind of like wanting her to move her head up, so she is definitely not in a position of power. So we have someone who's a protagonist and seemingly could be our heroine, not in a position of power. So for me, I'm looking at it, this can be an anti-hero, which we're not going to talk about, but if you wanted to go to literarydevices.net, the nice little link I gave you earlier this semester, you may want to look up anti-hero. We also have this shading here, and this hue here is very light, almost like she's glowing. She is super important. Like, she is super important. So this is her story. So we know from this one frame so many things about this story. Let's move on. This one is a really cool one. I saw this and it was really, really cool. This is one of the panels here. This scene is actually really well done, I thought. So well done that I actually put one of those panels as something of a consideration for one of your activities. So what we have here, we have line. Let's start with line. Lines are here, blah, 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 blah. This right here, this line around Micah is glowing, right? This is whenever I say, remember I said when an artist uses one of the elements for emphasis, they only use one of the elements, they don't use them all. The only element they have here for emphasis is line, and it's this particular line in this particular shade, this particular hue, this particular color. It is white. So it's got value, it's got line, and it's got color all in one. Oh, wait, let me go back. I'm sorry. Um, Remember, I like to look at the shapes. So this is a rectangle here, and the focal point is about here. And we have this here, and it's not, if you notice, those who are who are a little obsessive about things, this panel is not straight. This panel is off center, um, which is super important. We have the juxtapositions of where objects are, so that's space. And so it's off center a little bit because things ain't right. If things ain't right, things are a little off center. So this is not right. This is what's going on, is not right. So this is what's in the center here. And this emblem is going to be important here, in the story. I kind of feel, I don't know, hint, hint, going to be important. So this is why it's kind of in the middle. You also have, it's also kind of giving you direction. There's an implied line here. Remember implied lines? How this is going, it's drawing your eye to this person's face and their face of glee. Well, Miss Half-Wolf is in the shadows, right? Even though she doesn't have any color, she's absence of color, but this line pops her out a little bit. So that means things ain't right. Things ain't going right. Oh, homegirl right here, better watch your back. See how that works? Okay, so here's one. You probably have seen me use it in D2L, um, for an assignment. That was actually my little joke. No, I don't want to do the assignment. Fighting only makes it worse. Okay, so again, let's look at the shape. I like to go outside in. It's just years of journalism just teaches me that. So this is a rectangle, long lengthwise. So that makes it here is the center, right? So I'm looking at things here, and I'm looking at things here. And this is an off-center thing too as well. So this is an off-center thing, and we have her with the chain. We've got some texture here with the chain. We have some texture here with the geometric shapes in her wings, right? The lines that are here also give texture right here. We also have size in relation. So even though she's being she is dominating this poor person with wings. Oh my goodness, this poor person with wings, this poor arcanic with wings. She is the dominant visual because she is bigger in size than her. Um, so she is not, even though she is holding this poor Arcanic's chain, she's not going to have much more of an important role in this story. But this person is. Um, she may be a primary character. If you've read the story, she's not going to be. She's going to be a secondary character, but she has an important role as a secondary character. So we see that as well. And also interesting, if we're looking at argument, the dark hues here, you have an arcanic that's dark, and you have um, the person who has their chains as really light. So those of you who were talking about racism or prejudice as being part of the argument here, at least in the narrative part, here is some evidence here. You've got this angel, and even from this angle, how it's kind of off center here, it almost feels like I can tilt my computer. Um, it's almost like she's falling, that the angel's falling. It's a falling angel who is dark, and the person who has them in chains. So it's a lot of argument happening in this particular image here. Let's go here. This is the one where I said I was going to talk about. This is a really cool one, and people underestimate this panel. It's a really cool panel. I don't know why. There's a lot of things going on here. So again, let's go outside in. I'm looking at the rectangle, and I'm looking at the middle being a route here. So there's anything really interesting about visually as far as what's designed as playing part in the middle. What's in the middle really here is words. So these words are in the middle, so this may be interesting to look at. So let's read it. Oh gods, you think your special power will help you. It never works. So knowing, after having read just the narrative and not concentrating on the visuals, this is very telling. So the design here is helping with the foreshadowing of a story. See how that works? It's kind of a weird thing, right? Again, this is why you practice, practice, practice. And I always start again with the shape of the panel. And the shape of the panel tells me where the center is. And I always start with the center. And here in this particular center, what is in the center is not what was drawn by an artist per se, but what a writer has written. So what the artist is trying to tell you is you need to understand that this bubble is really important. I'm doing something here. It's a foreshadowing that's happening in this story. So that's pretty cool. So let's look at distance here. You have the distance. Remember, we talked about the intimacy, the closeness um, between two things, two objects in a panel or in a visual. So they're actually pretty darn close, right? They should be close to best friends. They're really close, but I'm looking also at the direction of these horses. You have the horse going this way and the horse going that way. So you're looking at space here. This is a panel with lots of space potential. So the closeness of the space means that they're really, really close. But this couple, they're in a desolate place. This is a desolate space back here. There's nothing. There's no buildings. There's not even a tent. It's just flat. So they're isolated. It's just them against the world. And they're about to split because one horse is going one way, and the other horse is going in the other way. And the author is telling us, look at this. Look at this foreshadow I'm doing here. Let's also look at colors here. Let's look at the hues specifically. The white horse, which is going away with our protagonist here, our hero, is white. This one who is going away from us is brown. It's almost like they fade into the panel a little bit, right? Because the panel is it's the lightest, one of the lightest of the darks, is what I want to say. So the value here is dark. It's almost like they're going to fade away. And this is really setting up our hero as a savior, really. They're on their white horse to save um, the Arcanics. Something's got to be done, and Micah Half-Wolf is on the case, right? So this is what's really, really interesting. You have a little bit of text here going on here on the bottom, all right? See how I did that? See how I just went from outside in, looking at the elements and understanding how the elements work. I can say, all right, the argument of this is, or it could be that Micah works alone, or Micah's gonna go off to save the Arcanics alone. She is set up as the savior here. Her friend, who has helped her and has gone through all this with her, is going in the opposite direction. So maybe you want to say something along the lines of um, saving is is a solo ambition, right? So that's maybe something you want to say. This is one of my favorites. Oh, it's so beautiful. I love this artwork here. So let's look at the shape. It's a rectangle shape. What is in the middle? Nothing. Um, no, something's in the middle, and it's this. So there's nothing really. It's really just drawing part of it. But then I'm looking at this, and there's an implied line here, and I'm wondering if you see that. See how this eye is kind of like doing this thing? It's kind of almost pointing where to look. And Micah is right dead in the center of this frame. So is this eye, right? They're perfectly aligned here. So this is an implied line. Gotta watch out for those implied lines. They sneak up on you, right? And so this is an implied line, almost as in Micah and the monster are one. Um, and so what you also have here, I like this texture going on here with the monster kind of like gripping her shoulders, almost crawling around her body. So I think that's kind of interesting as well. It's beautiful. And this one plays with a lot with value here with the oop, hello. With the darks and the lights here and the little spots of white, kind of almost otherworldly. So, so this monster that's inside her is otherworldly. It's not of her. It's not of her people. It's not of this world. Not saying it's an alien. I am not saying that. But I'm saying that this is not of the world that she is from. So that's kind of interesting. So that makes her kind of otherworldly as well, or even makes her a monster. It's up to you to decide, right? So that's all I have for the annotations. I hope you learned something as we were going through the annotations. I know that this lesson's a little long. I'm already hitting the 40-minute mark, but I wanted to make sure that I annotated these things for you, so you understood how they worked. So what did you learn? Obviously, you learned the elements of design. And you'll learn it again when you look at this video again. You'll understand how an artist can use these elements to create an argument. And as I was annotating, you kind of saw how, especially the one with the two horses, how interesting that was, and how the artist is literally saying, you need to look at this bubble. This bubble is very important. I know my art is awesome, but this bubble is where it's at right now. So, you know, the fact that that bubble was in the middle was not an accident. Artists do those on purpose, just like how writers do that on purpose. They write what they write on purpose. You want to know how to annotate a piece of art here. And so I showed you how to annotate a piece of art. Again, annotating is not about just taking notes. It's literally thinking out loud. It's thinking on paper. It's thinking through the notes. Maybe even asking questions. Why did the artist put those flecks of white in that one photo with Micah and the monster? Why is there an implied line there? Why isn't Micah in the middle of the frame? Why is she kind of on the bottom and the monster on top? And why is there an implied line there? Depends, right? and why context is important when looking at art. So context is important is because these panels don't sit by themselves, right? They're part of the bigger narrative. So if you're talking about Monstress and you're talking about what makes a monster, what defines a monster, or maybe you're talking about how race, race and prejudice are monstrous things, or how um, what it means to actually be human. Um, does being human mean being monstrous, or does it mean being good? Um, all that will come out in the wash, essentially, in the art. So I hope you learned a lot through this. This is probably one of the longest lessons I've actually ever done, but I hope you learned something from it. It's important that you listen again and you practice, practice, practice. You'll have a discussion post along with this. And if you have any questions, you know how to get me. All right, guys. See you later.